Viewer discretion is advised. This episode is called Sick and Twisted. And we all know what happened to JonBenet. And this episode focuses on some of the sadistic actions that were taken against JonBenet that night. And hopefully it will shed some light on what might have occurred or who actually killed JonBenet. So let the video begin. So before I start off with this title here, Intruder Killed JonBenet, Sequence of Events, I want to go over these events that we know pretty much for sure as fact. And yes, I did a video similar to this one before, but this video is better. So first, we know that JonBenet was taken to the basement. It's just a question when that occurred. And then we know that her underwear bottoms were removed. And we know, or she might have screamed, according to the neighbor. And then we know that she was garroted with the white nylon cord, and it was embedded in her neck. And we know that someone wiped her thighs with a cloth and redressed her. And then we know that she was wrapped in the white blanket. And now I have garroted with the cord for the second time. And that's because if an intruder did this horrible act, he toyed with her with the garrote at first, and then at some point strangled her and killed her with the garrote. And then we know that she was sexually assaulted because there was smeared blood on her thighs and injuries to her vagina. And we know that she was hit on the top of the head with something hard that fractured her skull and broke off a fragment. And we know that she wet herself, and her wrists were tied and duct taped her mouth, and she was placed in the wine cellar. Now this video is broken into two parts. The first part is if an intruder killed JonBenet and the sequence of events that I propose because they make logical sense. And the second part is my true feeling of what happened, that John Ramsey killed JonBenet, and the sequence of events that occurred and the logic behind them. So logically, if an intruder killed JonBenet, that person or someone else wrote the ransom note previous to the attack on JonBenet. So the attack on JonBenet started when she was taken to the basement. Then obviously some things occurred down in the basement, but then the next thing would be the garrote with the nylon cord, kind of as a torture device. Then her underwear bottoms were removed, and I believe those underwear were brand new out of the package, and JonBenet put them on early Christmas morning or just prior to going over to the White's house for that Christmas dinner. Then JonBenet was molested and tortured with a garrote and sexually assaulted. Now the neighbor said that she heard a scream, and so JonBenet probably screamed while she was being tortured or around this time right here. Now this was probably the moment the intruder hit JonBenet on the top of the head and fractured her skull. And there wasn't a lot of bleeding because the cord was tight around her neck, preventing blood flow or blood pressure. We know from the autopsy that there were little fibers on her thighs, and so we know that she was wiped with a cloth. And we know when she was found that she was dressed, so the intruder would have had to redress her. And so there's a big contention there why it wasn't an intruder. Now this is the second time I mentioned that she was garroted, because the first time was to torture her, and that process continued until this time where she was strangled and murdered. And at this point, she wet herself, and this seems logical to me because she lost control of her bodily functions, and this does happen often when someone is strangled to death. Now this aligns with the Ramsey statements, because according to them, she fell asleep in the car and then she was carried to bed, and then several hours went by and then this happened. So that works. Now her wrists were tied and duct tape was put on her mouth, and I placed this here, but I grant you this, that this could have happened sometime during the garroting phase. Now she was wrapped in a white blanket, and this does seem unusual for an intruder to do. What might have occurred was the intruder retrieved the white blanket when he got JonBenet and brought her down to the basement. So all he really did was wrap her with it. And then the last thing that the intruder did was place her in the wine cellar, close that door, and latch it. And this is explainable also, because the intruder could have wanted to hide JonBenet away to give him more time to get away. And if you have the opinion that, well, she wasn't hid very well, so this doesn't make sense. But the fact is, no one found JonBenet right away. So there's no way you can argue that this wasn't effective. It bought the intruder 7 hours. Now here's my opinion of this sequence of events, and that John Ramsey killed JonBenet. 1, she ate the fresh pineapple. 2, she was taken to the basement. 3, her underwear bottoms were removed. 4, she was sexually assaulted. 5, she might have screamed. 6, JonBenet was choked out with John's bare hands. 7, she was wiped with a cloth and redressed. 8, she was garroted with the nylon cord. 9, she wet herself. 10, her wrists were tied and her mouth was duct taped. 11, she was wrapped in the blanket. And 12, she was placed in the wine cellar. And now I will explain why this is the order and what it tells us who killed her. When the Ramseys returned from the White's house, Patsy was doing her thing, preparing for the trip. John was maybe checking the weather and preparing for the flight, or thinking about the flight. And Burke got out the glass and the tea and the bowl of pineapple and a plastic container that I'll mention later. And after Patsy went to bed and Burke went to bed, JonBenet was taken to the basement, and John had molested her in the past, and he molested her that night. Her underwear bottoms were removed, and they were a clean pair right out of the package that JonBenet had put on that day. There was no blood stain on them. She was molested and sexually assaulted. She was injured from the assault and bleeding and got scared and cried out or tried to run away. Something happened at that moment. Then John put his hand over her mouth or on her neck and choked JonBenet unconscious. And at that moment, I think John felt that she was dead or gravely injured, and so he hatched a plan to cover up his crime. He wiped up or off the blood from JonBenet's body with a cloth, and then he redressed her with her clothes. And sometime after this, the blood stain got on her new underwear. Then she was garroted with the nylon cord, and John pulled as tight as he could to kill her, and that's why the white nylon cord was embedded in her neck. At this point, she wet herself, and the urine flowed through her underwear into her long johns and onto the carpet, and this is where the unknown male DNA got introduced to the blood stain in her underwear. And then she was hit on the head with a massive blow that fractured her skull. And I've said earlier this was done because of the garroting, but I've changed my mind. This was done to make sure that JonBenet was dead, and there was no doubt about it. There might have been a little break before these next three things occurred, but her wrists were tied and her mouth was duct taped just to make it look like it was part of the crime, but it had nothing to do with the crime. Then she was wrapped in the white blanket, and John could have done this, or maybe Patsy did this when she found out that JonBenet was dead that night. Then she was placed in the wine cellar, the door closed and latched. And then the final act, or one of the final things that they did, was write the ransom note to cover up what truly happened to JonBenet. And that's why it's so long or lengthy. And the note aligns with the theory that it had something to do with John's work. The Intruder theory sequence of events on top, and the John Ramsey theory on the bottom. And the reason that it was John Ramsey is because of the facts. JonBenet did have fresh pineapple in her digestive system just below her stomach. There's no sense why the intruder would wipe JonBenet off with a cloth indicated or shown in the autopsy report with the little fibers on her thighs. And why would the intruder redress her, wrap her in the white blanket, and place her body in the wine cellar? Also, JonBenet's wrists were tied lightly, which wouldn't make sense if it was an intruder, and her mouth was duct taped. So how could she scream, and how could the duct tape stay on her mouth through this whole assault? It sure looks like the duct tape was placed on her mouth after she was dead. And finally, the sequence of events seems to work if John Ramsey was the killer. Now look at these two stills. The top still is from the videotape that was done sometime around December 26th in the evening. And then the bottom photo is a photograph from that morning around 9 a.m. And look what I noticed. Do you see it? there's a plastic container next to the glass. So Burke must have got that out when they returned from the White's house. And during December 26th, someone put it away somewhere, and then somebody placed the Kleenex box on the table. Well, this ends this episode, and I'll see you next week with that case.